After there was a man called by the name of Zacharias, or Zacchaeus. He was a child tax collector. He was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. Zacchaeus was trying to see who Jesus was and was unable because of the crowd, for he was small in stature. So he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree in order to see him. And he was about to pass through that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for today I must stay at your house." And he hurried and came down and received him gladly. When they saw it, they all began to grumble, saying, "He has gone to be the guest of a man who is a sinner." Zacchaeus stopped and said to the Lord, "Behold, Lord, half of my possessions I will give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will give back 4 times as much." And Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he, too, is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost."
Thank you, Bill. Sean and I have been struggling with this lung grunge for about 10 days now, so I'll do the best I can. I've titled this Salvation According to Jesus. You know, there in the time of the Protestant Reformation, there was an argument. The Roman Catholics said that people are justified by their works and their good deeds, and Luther and his contemporaries said, no, people are justified by their faith alone. And each is partly true. And unfortunately, the church wasn't able to come together and to see both sides of this coin. But if we look at the teaching of Jesus in this particular passage, it's not about good works to the poor, but it's about reconciliation with other people, along with reconciliation with God. So let's talk about it a little bit. The plain in the valley of Jericho, it's called the city of palm trees. Back in the Old Testament, in Deuteronomy, it's said the city of palm trees. And so this is where Palm Sunday begins. Oh, let me just say this. We're jumping ahead. We also jumped ahead last year. And we talked about, Jesus going up the steps into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. If you want that sermon, it's on the website. But this is where Palm Sunday began, the trip from Jericho up to Jerusalem. The name means a place of fragrance. It's considered to be the oldest city, the oldest continuing city in the world. It existed before the Jews were in the land, and it was destroyed by the Jews as they entered the land. It was rebuilt by the Jews, and it's still a city. The initial city is on a mound, and it's in ruins, but the city is built around it today. And so you can go there today, and it's a place of fragrance, all kinds of flowers, and palm trees. And so Jesus is coming to Jerusalem. It's the final leg of the journey. He's made his way down from his home area through the mountains, and then it's come down into the valley, the Jordan Valley. And now he's about to enter into Jerusalem in the same way that the children of Israel came into the Promised Land thousands of years previously. Here's the map. I think I have a pointer here somewhere. Can you see the 2 X's there? Oh, it's really hard to see with this bright sun. I like bright sun, but it's not too good. I can't really show you that. It's only about, less than 30 miles from Jericho to Jerusalem. Oh, man. God, can you turn the lights out? This is the old city. It's been excavated. This is the place where the children of Israel marched around it every day, and they were able to take it. The walls came down. So Jesus is coming through the same place where the Israeli nation began. Now, it says there was a man named Zacchaeus, and he was, it says in this version, a chief tax collector, but if you look at the original, the article is not there, and it says the chief tax collector. This is the guy who is in charge of all the other tax collectors in Israel, in Judea. He is a very famous man. He's a very despised man because, as you know, the tax collectors were dishonest people. They were sellouts to the Roman government. They took whatever they could above what Rome required, and they blackmailed people, and people bribed them, and they were just not people that anybody liked. And so here, there's a guy who is the chief tax collector, and he's rich. And ironically, his name means pure. When Mom and Dad saw that it was a baby boy, oh, he's beautiful, he's pure, but he grew up to be a dishonest guy who became rich based on thievery. And he meets up with Jesus that particular day. He's chief among the publicans. And he was trying to see who Jesus was. If you ask people, do you believe in Jesus? I think he lived. Yeah, I think he existed at one time, and he was probably a good teacher. Or he's some sort of a prophet. But this person wanted to know who Jesus was. He wanted to see who he was. He was interested in the truth about Jesus. Now, nobody would have suspected that. It says he was short. I don't know if you can see this. This is a picture of Mo Howard. You know who the Three Stooges are. When you see the Three Stooges, they're all the same height, but they are only about this tall. And if you see them next to anybody else, and so I tried to find a small Jew to project to you, and the only one I could find was Mo, and that's Larry there in the wheelchair. He was a small guy. Sometimes small people have small man syndrome. Big truck, right? Small man syndrome, Napoleon complex. We don't know that this guy had a Napoleon complex, but he was certainly a strong enough person to hold back, and he was not afraid to do what he was doing, even though it made him a pariah in the community. And so he wanted to see who Jesus was. So he wouldn't really suspect that this is the kind of guy that is going to accept Jesus and live for Jesus. But it turns out that he is one of the people that did understand exactly who Jesus was and what the demands of Jesus upon a disciple would be. So he ran ahead and climbed in the sycamore tree to see him because he was going to pass that way. Now we have these huge sycamore trees down at the Sonnenberg mansion. We have these big sycamore trees, and the biggest one that I know of anywhere around here is right down here in Tichenor Point. I don't know if you've ever seen that thing. That thing is massive. It's as wide as this. That's not the kind of tree we're talking about here. It's a different kind of tree. It's an eastern sycamore. It has figs on it, and it has lots of little branches, and the branches branch off low, so it's easy kind of tree to climb. And so he's a short guy, and he climbs up in the fig tree. Now, they tell me that this is a joke because These trees are famous for having snakes in them. And so I'm sure he really did climb into the sycamore tree, but people were not likely to climb into sycamore trees because the snakes would get up in there and be in them. And so the idea that this guy is a snake and he's looking for Jesus, it's just a little bit of extra levity in the whole story. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down. I must stay at your house." Well, I say, how did Jesus know this guy's name? Oh, God put the name in his brain. I don't know how you understand Jesus, but Jesus was certainly a complete and total man. And I don't doubt that there could be a word of knowledge that God would have put in his brain. I don't doubt that that's possible, but I don't think that the story would indicate that, because there's a guy following Jesus named Matthew who is a tax collector, who has a reputation for getting up one day when Jesus came to him and said, "Follow me." He gets up, he leaves all the money in the tax station and everything like that, and he begins to be a disciple of Jesus. And I think if somebody did that, suppose Jesus came into the bank one day and said to the president of the bank, "Follow me," and he gets up and he leaves his bank behind and follows Jesus as a disciple and becomes a preacher. Would that be well known in the community? Yeah, this is a high-profile conversion of Matthew, and Matthew has a boss, and the boss's name is Zacchaeus. And so Jesus is able to call this person down by name. You don't have to have supernatural knowledge for this, because Matthew certainly would have recognized him. And Matthew certainly would have said, "Hey, that's my boss." And Jesus looks up and he's in the tree, and he knows his name, and he says, "I'd like to eat at your house." Do people ever invite your presence in their house? A little bit ago, a funny thing that happened just the other day. I've invited this person to come to some stuff at church, and he doesn't pick up on it, doesn't come. And another person who he knows came over to our house a while back, a couple months back, and we served him some venison. And unbeknownst to me, the other day, this guy was having lunch with this other guy, and the other guy said, "Hey, I was at Cotter's and I had the best venison I ever had." We serve good venison. We cook it right. We kill it right, we butcher it right, we package it right, and we cook it right. And it's good when we eat it. If you don't like venison, one of those steps has been missing. Usually the last one. People don't know how to cook it. And this guy said to me, "Hey, I was having dinner with him, and he said he had this best venison." And then he said, "Why didn't I get an invite?" And I've been inviting this guy to the men's breakfast and stuff. And so now we haven't set up the date, but he basically invited himself to my house. And I'm delighted that this is going to happen, because, it's a person in the fire department now. I'll tell Jim later who it is. And so Jesus says to Zacchaeus, "Hey, I'm having dinner at your place today." Now, this was more common in, biblical times, because there was no Wendy's or any other restaurant that you could really go to. There was only people that had a place big enough and money enough to offer people hospitality, maybe a place to stay if they're traveling through. And so Jesus is not afraid to invite himself into your house. Jesus is not afraid to invite himself into anybody's house. Jesus is willing to go into anybody's house, and he will ask them, "Can I come into your house?" And they can say yes, or they can say no. And Zacchaeus he wanted to know who Jesus was. That's what it says very, very specifically. And so he was happy to do that. Do you remember that Zacchaeus song that you sang in Sunday school? So he hurried down. I imagine that was a interesting little thing, little short legs coming down the limbs like stairs. And he was happy to welcome him. Probably the best meal in town. I envision maybe Thai. Do you love Thai? I love Thai food. I wish we had a Thai restaurant around here. We did have one until COVID hit, and then it's gone. There's Saks up in Fairport, but they don't have sit-down anymore. You can get takeout there, but that's excellent food. Probably the best meal in town. Probably the richest guy in town. You know, we've seen a lot of poor people that have been drawn to Jesus. Here we have a rich person that's being drawn to Jesus. And as soon as the religious people saw it, they began to grumble. I am better than he is. And he invited himself to his house. You know, when you're merciful to somebody that doesn't deserve it, there's always people that find fault with it. I mean, we've had times here in the past where people that are pariahs in the community, and we've been kind to them, and other people have, condemned us for it. Jesus was not afraid because he knew that this is a high-profile guy, and this is a guy that's really looking to see who he is, and he's really willing to make a change. And so he's willing to stake his reputation. He's willing to have a bad reputation just to meet with him and to be with him. And Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Half my possessions I will give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much." Well, when you say something like that publicly, how many people in Jericho had he defrauded? There's like 3 or 4 different kinds of giving. There's the tithing, to support the local house of God, and then there's offerings, which is to provide money for projects, and then there are alms. Jesus said, "Let your alms be, private. Don't say what your alms are going to be." Well, Zacharias here obviously didn't hear that teaching of Jesus, and in public he said, half. I'm going to give away half. Some of these rich people who really love God, they give away 90% and keep 10. And here is a fellow that is known for covetousness and greed, and when he meets Jesus, he's willing to give. In one place, in one of the letters Paul writes, he said, "Let him who steals steal no longer, but let him work so they may have something to give to the poor." And so immediately upon meeting Jesus, he says 2 things about money. Zacchaeus says 2 things about money. I'm going to give alms to the poor, and I'm going to repay 4 times what I have defrauded. I've told this story before. I never stole many things in my life because my father was against stealing, to say the very least. I'll tell you exactly what he said, but it's not church words. He said, "If you ever steal." And so one day, let me just say this. Only 2 things I ever stole in my life. I stole a pack of cigarettes from the store one time when I was about 12. And I stole an Arrowhead in 3rd grade. This girl brought in an Arrowhead for show and tell, and it got passed around the room. And when it got to me, it disappeared. Because I thought that Arrowhead was cool. And they had found it in the muck at Bloomfield. I don't know if you know much about Bloomfield, but if you go north of Bloomfield, not up the Victor Holcomb Road 444, but a little bit to the west, there's muck. And there was an Indian village back there, back in the day, and he found this arrowhead there, and it was perfect. It wasn't broken up by a plow or anything. And I stole it. 3rd grade, I was 8. And I had that thing for years. And after I was out of college and after I was already an associate pastor, I went to a garage sale one day, and there was a box, a cigar box of arrowheads for sale. And I asked how much. They told me a price. I thought it was a steal, giveaway price. I bought the box. And I took 4 of the best arrowheads, and the one that I stole, I knew which one it was. And I took it back to the girl I stole it from. I said, here's the one I stole, and here's 4 more. She was surprised. Never got along with her in school, but now we're friends. And I don't know how many people she told that story, but I'm sure she did. Zacchaeus was ready to make it right. Last year, a girl put up on her Facebook a picture of some hair. And she said, this is the hair that Kevin Cotter cut off me in art class along with another kid. I think the other kid did it. Because I don't remember doing it, but I vaguely remember it. So I thought, what would that be worth? So I got in my car. The minute I saw it, I got in my car and I took her $500 in cash, took it over and gave it to her. Because I figured that's what it was worth. You see, salvation is when, not only when you say the sinner's prayer and ask God to forgive you, salvation is when you make it right with the people if you have the ability to make it right. And the law was, if anybody steals something, they have to be paid back 4-fold. I think I've got that on the next slide. Yeah, if a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, he shall pay 5-fold for the ox, 4 for the sheep. So there was no such thing as jail for stealing in biblical times. You had to pay a fine. And it was a 4-fold fine. And obviously, this fellow knew the law. He knew that he had defrauded people, and he knew that the demand upon him to make it right, for him to receive his salvation, is to make it right, not just with God, but with the person who he defrauded. He said, I will pay back 4-fold. Now, there are some things that you just can't make right. If you kill somebody, you really can't make that right. That has to be an eye for an eye type of thing. There's no way to pay that back. And sometimes people that have been defrauded or have been wrong, sometimes they're dead. And sometimes, there are other extenuating circumstances where you can't make it right. I understand that. But where it can be made right, it needs to be made right, because that's what Jesus taught. So God taught us to pray, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. There, in another version, it says, forgive us our sins. Well, biblically speaking, there's a difference between a sin and a trespass. Under the Jewish law, a sin is when you harm somebody, but you don't intend to do it. A trespass is when you harm somebody when you do intend to do it. And so when it says, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. So if someone comes to us and says, I'm sorry I did this to you, I'm sorry, will you forgive me? You have to say yes. And if you go to somebody and say, I'm sorry I trespassed against you, will you forgive me? They have to say yes. And so this man, Zacchaeus, understands this, and he says, okay, I've got all this money, and it's not doing me any good. Really? It's like they interviewed the Russian guy, and they said to him, You have a money problem. He says, no, we have no money problem. Lots of money, nothing to buy. I mean, there comes a point in what we accumulate where we don't need any more. You know, who needs $40 million? This guy is very rich, and he's able to afford to pay back everybody he's defrauded fourfold and give half to the poor. That's how much money he has, and that's how much money he's willing to give to make things right, to see who Jesus really is. So, if you're presenting your offering at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your offering there. What's the offering for? The offering is for forgiveness of sins. Under the old covenant, you sin against somebody, you trespass against somebody, you have to bring the offering to the priest slays it, he prays for you, God forgives you. But if you are a trespasser and you haven't made it right, you haven't really followed the law. So he says, go first and make it right, be reconciled to your brother, and then come and present your offering. And Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house. To really believe in Jesus is to believe in what he said. It's not just say the sinner's prayer and everything's cool. Well, there's some truth to that. But if you have harmed somebody and you can make it right, reconciliation, if you sin against a person or trespass against a person, you've really sinned or trespassed against God, because the person is made in the image of God. And so salvation is not just saying a sinner's prayer. In fact, the sinner's prayer isn't even found in the Bible. The prayer that needs to be made is, God, give me the strength to make it right. And so this is the first teaching that was given to the disciples and to the people around him on Palm Sunday. Are there any comments? How many of you don't like what I said? Would a person be right? Suppose somebody does something really bad to somebody, and then the person says, "Okay, I'm going to be a Christian now. I've said the sinner's prayer, and I'm going to start doing it. I'm going to start going to church." And they show up, and they get involved in the church, and they never made it right. What will the offended person think, and what will the offended person say? Who has something to add to this? I don't see Gene. He's always good. Oh, there he is. What are you doing on that side of the church? You had to see Bill, so you changed. You became a.
So, one thing we said at the beginning.
Microphone, please.
Justification through faith versus justification through works. My belief is that if you have faith, you can't help but have works. I mean, can you imagine when we first moved to New York, we were going to a different church, and we actually started coming here because I couldn't sign their covenant. There was a part in it that I could not agree with, and because I couldn't sign their covenant, I couldn't become a member of that church. And because I couldn't become a member, they wouldn't let me do certain things. I couldn't teach. And there was this need in me to be able to do that. So I hear this justification through faith versus justification through works. And I go, if you have true faith, the works are, you can't help it. I mean, that's just the way I am. And then I see people that say they have faith, but they have no works. What kind of faith is that?
Well, that's what James says.
Right. That doesn't demand that you do good works. So that's just the way I've concluded.
But Martin Luther said the book of James should be cut out of the Bible with a penknife because it didn't agree with his
I think
thinking.
anybody who doesn't agree with a certain scripture would say the same thing. I think that's why it's all there.
Anyone else? All right. If you're interested in the Stations of the Cross, the Lutheran Church is going to be doing that. I'm not sure what day, but it'll be down here at Notre Dame. I'll find out and I'll send out a email or a Facebook announcement when that will be if you're interested in that. It's always interesting. Unfortunately, there's a couple stations of the cross that aren't biblical, but just ignore those and just go with the biblical ones. But it's a nice time of reflection. Unfortunately, as you know, we're just Protestants and we don't do the whole Holy Week and we don't do the Ash Wednesday or any of that stuff. But those things do have great meaning. But they are available other places, so that's available. And next week we're going to have dinner. It's easier to get people, not say dinner, I mean breakfast. It's easier to get people to come and eat. Easter is the time that they will probably come and eat. And so bring somebody with you next week and bring something with you. Wear purple. We all wore green last week, but we're going to wear purple on Sunday because that's the royal color. Anything else before we go? I couldn't hear you. You don't have any purple? Buy some purple. Sell your second coat and get some purple. I'm just kidding. You can be the odd man out, Gene. You usually are.